the first ever penis corner I ever came across.
And our friend had found like these kind of like, they look like mandala, color your own mandala things, but really they had like loads and loads of tiny like penises in them. Hi, I'm Jess. Today we're opening up on Ceremony for enthusiasts, iconoclasts, anarchists, and you.
Welcome to Opening Ceremony. If you're new to my community, my constellation, welcome. This is where we use ceremony as a focus, like a lens on human story. And there is a treat in store for you today. First of all, a trigger warning. There's lots of talk about death because that's kind of what we do. But if you're not in the mood for talking about death or listening about death today, there's a little bit about grief in here. So you might want to go and listen to something livelier somewhere else for today. But I would urge you to come back to it when you're feeling in the mood because it's really, really positive and hopeful. And to that end, I will introduce you to the people that you're going to meet today. So we have Postal Service for the Dead, which is in LA, and we have the Brighton Death Collective, which you might guess is in Brighton. And these two organizations have been collaborating. And I have got the amazing joy of inviting them both on together. So this is really exciting. And I just want to tell you what they're about. Postal Service for the Dead is this brilliant, brilliant initiative where you can literally write letters to your dead. And we will talk a lot more about how and why later on. And I'm going to introduce you first to that concept and the person behind that. So we've got Janelle Ketcher, described as a Midwestern human living in Los Angeles. A Midwestern human, I've not had one of those on here before, but I'm very delighted, who enjoys exploring creativity, human connection, and end of life. Janelle has a BFA in painting, art history, and social practice from the Kansas City Art Institute, received her certification in social emotional arts from UCL Arts and Healing, and completed her end-of-life training program at Going with Grace. Mary is a local friend who is in Brighton, who set up the Brighton Death Collective, born out of lots of experiences of her own losses and griefs and the inadequacy of preparedness for people who are facing death, all sorts of issues that she came up against where she felt that people were underserved in awareness and knowledge, but also then became really interested in it and went in a bit deeper and hooked up with Janelle and did a little Postal Service for the Dead workshop here. I think it was Budapest, and we'll check with that in a minute. And so then the Brighton Death Collective was born, and her name's Mary Parnwell, and you can look Mary up on the Brighton Death Collective on Instagram. So their thing is peer-led, creating welcoming and inclusive spaces to talk all things death, loss, and end of life. And they're here to demystify death admin and dying well. So these two phenomenal women are here for you today, and you're going to hear all the brilliant stories behind what they do and how they do it. So I'm going to introduce them themselves now. They've heard me talking, and now they're going to just come on. So let's start with you, Janelle. What time is it where you are?
It is 8:19 a.m. So starting off my day with a wonderful conversation. I'm so excited to be here.
That's so nice. And we absolutely love that you're here. We are obviously just about to have our afternoon cups of tea because here it's 4:00, it's gloomy, it's raining. It's not good, but it's also not Florida, which is not great. So today, I just wanted to say, first of all, something that you just introduced me to, which is that it's National Indigenous Day, did you say?
It's Indigenous Peoples Day, which,
Indigenous Peoples Day.
well, currently in the United States, it has not like fully transitioned over to Indigenous Peoples Day completely. This day is also Columbus Day. So you can see it's this, there's been a movement to move Columbus Day to recognize Indigenous people. But at the federal level, they still are like, you can celebrate whichever one you want. So I do hope that in the coming years that we make this like fuller transition to not celebrating Columbus and transition to celebrating and honoring and learning about all the Indigenous people that have come before us and are still here in the United States.
Well, that sounds like a really, really good move to me. I actually had never heard of it, so I'm delighted to be saying a little bit about that. Now, everyone, if you're on YouTube, you'll be able to see my notepad, which is what my life is like. So it's just full of notes, very high tech. And I've got lovely, lovely notes in here from our conversation before we met for the recording today. So we want to make everyone out there aware, because a lot of my listeners have never heard of Postal Service for the Dead. So if you could share with them what Postal Service for the Dead is and a little bit about how it works, that would be brilliant.
Sure. So, I started Postal Service for the Dead in December of 2022. Where do I begin? So I started it because I've kind of been in the death and grief community for a while.
I love
My
the deaf community.
Death,
That's
yeah,
what we
I was
should
like, I'm just gonna combine them. My brain was like sick of saying both of them at this point. Death community.
the deaf community.
Um,
It started here, everyone. It started here.
My mom, Mary Susan Sineni, had frontal temporal dementia for about 10 years, and she died in 2019. She was 63 years old. So that was a significant part of my teenage years and kind of young adult life. Um, so that would have been in 2020, a few years after she died, about 3 years after she died. 4 years, who can keep track of time? So in December, so sorry, I'm mixing up my timelines so much. It's hard to keep track. But what happened?
I
So
mean,
her
really,
birthday is
timelines. We don't mind about timelines.
yeah,
Actually, when I write eulogies for people and tributes, I very rarely put timelines in, because really, people are much more interested in the content and the meaning of what happened to you than the dates.
sure.
Not worry
Well,
about it.
thank you for that. Well, her birthday is November 30th. So I was at the end of November. I was thinking about her birthday coming up. And I remember just waking up like a few days before her birthday, and I woke up and I had this like very urgent feeling of I just really wanted to send her a birthday card. Um, and it was with that feeling that sparked me researching. I'm like, is there anything that exists like this? I couldn't at the time. I will say since then, I have found some similar projects. We're all kind of doing different things, but at that time, I couldn't find anything that exactly how I was imagining it in my head. So then, yeah, in December, I founded Postal Service for the Dead. And what it is, we are a physical P.O. box here which post office box is what that stands for, in Los Angeles. And people can mail in letters to anyone their life has died. There are 3 levels of engagement that people can write in with. If you send a letter and the backside, so you have to address it like you would any normal letter, and on the backside, if it's left blank, then we will never read it, we will never open it, but we still keep it in the archive of letters. If you mark it with a heart on the backside, then it will be open and read, but it will not be shared publicly. And if you mark it with a star, then that is the option that indicates to us that we can share the contents of the letter. But before we share on either social media, or we've had exhibitions as well, we do anonymize it by removing any names. We redact names from the letter. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell, and I'll leave it there.
What I love about this, and I know I've shared this with lots of my constellation before, but it is really nice. So those of you that haven't heard me talk about this before, I didn't have a particularly close relationship with my dad, and when he died, felt the urge to write a letter to him, and I think that was in 2014. Didn't know anything about Postal Service for the Dead, but it really resonates for me, because I did write him a letter, in fact, and in it I thanked him for something significant that he said to me, which was that he felt that we were worlds apart. He was 57 when I was born, and I was born in the early 70s, when life was really different to his life. And we just couldn't connect. And one day he said to me, you know what, we're just worlds apart. And it gave me permission to think, oh, it's okay. I don't have to relate and he doesn't have to relate to me. And I wrote him a thank you. It makes me go, it gives me the chills a little bit even now. I wrote him a thank you letter and I didn't really thank him for very much. I mean, you know how it is. You look back and you think maybe I could have handled things differently. But anyway, we just had a problematic relationship. And in that letter, I wrote and said, thank you for telling me that and for saying that because it really helped me massively. And I lay it in his grave. But when I heard about your project, and I'd heard about it before, I just thought it was the most brilliant thing to think it's not too late. Like, it's never too late. And I really like people out there to know that if you feel like you want to write a letter or send a card, it's not too late. And you don't have to write it just to yourself or in your diary. You can put it out there. There's something about that physicality that's really, really helpful. So I absolutely love the whole thing of the physicality again of getting a pen and a piece of paper and writing. And I love stationery and I love stamps and I love all of that. And a lot of my constellation will be the same. What's beautiful about it in this context and talking to my podcast audience is that we are interested in stories, aren't we? Human stories, how they happen. And the idea that a person's story will be heard maybe years after an event by you in this place, it really reminds me of a message in a bottle. And my best friend asked me the other day if I would put a message in a bottle when she died. I think she said, would I put some ashes in a bottle and put it out to sea? And I remember doing that, putting messages in bottles. And I love the romance of these messages turning up maybe years later. So that's really, really lovely. A little bit about how you have connected your arts practice and your archiving. You're actually an archivist, aren't you?
Well, I'm a student, so maybe archivist in
Oh,
training would be the better.
you're
Yeah,
a
I'm
baby
currently a
archivist.
baby archivist. I'm working on getting my master's in library and information science at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, a remote program because I'm based here in Los Angeles.
Do you think an archivist sounds like an interesting animal, like an aardvark or?
It's like an aardvark, but like definitely with like a cardigan and glasses.
So there's something really beautiful about applying those practices to, you know, the recording. And we talked a bit before about the Hindu tradition when my partner's dad went back to the Ganges and spoke to the priests and people there when his wife died. And they're able to go back centuries and centuries, generation after generation, where the names are recorded. So the idea of recording and archiving is really important in death. I mean, that's why we have all the memorials for the war memorials and all that sort of thing.
There's this we try with Postal Service for the dead too to encourage people to let their grief be whatever it is. So sometimes, like if you think of a memorial, it's probably honoring or celebrating. And sometimes that's just not the relationship that we might have. I will say like 90% of the letters we have are very loving. And we do want to hold space for sometimes those stories aren't beautiful. Sometimes they aren't kind. And that's okay. If that's the story that needs to be shared and the feelings that need to be expressed, then there's a space for that as well.
And people presumably find it healing. Do you have emails from people saying, I did this process and I found it really helpful?
Yeah, I have received a handful of DMs on our Instagram, or I've done a few like pop-up workshops, which I will talk a little bit about with Mary in a moment. And in person, I've heard like testimonial of just how healing and helpful it is to go through the writing process. And I will say too, I like to mention, like, I don't claim that writing a letter, like, that's not our ingenious idea, right? That's been a therapeutic tool in many capacities, like just writing a letter specifically is used in a lot of modalities. But like you mentioned, the physical act of sending the letter or knowing potentially that this letter is going to be received and shared and stored within a community of other letters. I think a lot of people do resonate with that and feel comforted or perhaps also inspired to write by that, or they feel it feels like a safety net in a way. But I tell people if I do the workshops or even if they reach out to me online, I'm like, you don't have to send the letter. If people just sit down and write, I know that's going to be meaningful. So whether you send it or keep it or burn it, whatever you want to do, it's a helpful process.
It's something to do with externalizing, isn't it? And these are all things that are really central to my practice. The idea of the old being reinterpreted. So I think the fact that it isn't a new idea, the writing of the letter, makes what you do more powerful because it's a new and accessible way of doing it. So I'm quite interested in that modern way of doing an old thing. And also, we're all over the world, aren't we? So it sort of has a resonance in our cultural age. But also, I think what you said is really important, that you can say whatever you like. And that's really the healing power of that, regardless of what you do with it. I think it's really important. And the sense of community and belonging together in it is I just think it's astonishing. So I'm going to move over to Mary, because I know then we can talk a bit about that very community and the fact that it's crossing, coming across the pond, and there's this movement across these different communities. And I know that Mary introduced it at a festival, and I'd like Mary to introduce to us herself a little bit, how she got here, and also what happened when you introduced Postal Service to the UK.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So, so I set up Brighton Death Collective in 2023, so last year. And it was really, like you say, born out of a real need, or what I perceive to be a real need for a non-taboo space to grieve, I think, initially. And also, one of my workshops that I run is getting all your ducks in a row, which is helping people with their, planning for end of life at whatever age, whatever stage, just getting all their ducks in a row, especially for the LGBTQI plus community and neurodivergent community. So we do that. And and I think that I was introduced to you as part of Coffin Club, weren't you? When with your Coffin Club hat on. So I set up Brighton Death Collective last year, so 2023. Because I'm a very many times bereaved person, I think is how I describe myself. And there have been a variety of different deaths in my life, sort of deaths within what I call like the normal time frame of life. Older people had deaths through illness, deaths through accident, and deaths by suicide as well. And what I realized was that for me, having been to some of the normal kind of bereavement groups, there wasn't really a place for a very traumatized bereaved person where I could really open up, without sort of feeling like I was taking over the space. So that's why I sort of set up Brighton Death Collective primarily as a queer neurodivergent person, to just sort of create community where I felt like I needed it. And also to be able to provide resources for people to do this thing that I call getting all your ducks in a row. So, we look at choice and end of life care, advanced medical directives, planning your own funeral, and thank you for your Coffin Club resources, Jess, which I like to share with people. Planning funerals on a budget from the Modern Funeral Company, and all of those sorts of things. And I was really kindly invited to support the death awareness space at Buddhafield Festival in the southwest of England by a friend of mine called Ayuna. And I went there and just sort of really felt like I'd landed, really landed where I was meant to be. And I had planned to do a letter writing workshop there because, I've had that experience of writing letters to people who have died. And so had my son when he was very little. I really witnessed him at age 6 writing a letter to his nan who died and then burning it, and really engaging with that. And actually, after my mum died in an accident, we as a family decided to have a little post box on my dad's land, where if we wanted to write something to her, we could just pop it in a little post box and nobody would read it. It would just be in there. And it's pretty open to the elements. So it's not like, it is a closed box, but it is outside. So, I don't know what sort of state the cards and letters would be in. But, as a practice, it was something I was very familiar with. And so, I had planned to do a letter writing kind of ritualistic workshop at Butterfield, perhaps with people burning the letters afterwards or something if they didn't want to take them home. But then I realized that fire regulations wouldn't really permit the burning of the letters on the campsite so much. And I found Postal Service for the Dead's Instagram just by following other death positive Instagram accounts, really, and Order of the Good Death and various other kind of organizations. And I found Postal Service and got in touch and saw that Janelle had, really in a very detailed and easy to follow way created a how-to, for running your own postal service event. And I was like, fantastic. Here are all of the instructions. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's already there. And in fact, it's better because actually people can post it out. I was sort of trying to work out how it would be for people to post things. I couldn't post them from the festival. Would I take responsibility for that? And that's what I did in the end. If people did want to post them, I took them and posted them as a bundle to Janelle. And so, so that was how I did it. So I got in touch with Janelle and said, hey, can I do this? Is this all right? And of course, Janelle, said, yes, absolutely. This is what it's about. Great. And I went, and at Butterfield, we had this death awareness space, which was incredibly necessary. It was just mind-boggling, really, how important and needed we were. And how busy we were. We had a drop-in space each day from 9 till 5 every day, which was just busy. I kept wanting to call it Tea and Sympathy. Nobody else was latching onto this plan. Try again next year calling it Tea and Sympathy. But it was very much a come and have a cup of tea or coffee and have a chat. And then we had the separate space, which was a kind of canvas bell tent. At times it had a different altar in the middle. And, it was a real haven, actually, for people to come and participate in a workshop there. So I did run my Getting All Your Ducks in a Row workshop, which was fantastic and really well attended. And then I ran a Postal Service for the Dead event there. And I naively thought, oh, this will be the more chill of the two, because I didn't have to remember lots of information. For the Getting All Your Ducks in a Row, I have lots of different types of forms and letters to show people and legal information and stuff. We have a big kind of more in-depth discussion, whereas I had pictured the Postal Service event being relatively, it was relaxed in some way, but I had pictured it being an easier workshop to run. And it was very different, actually. It was just very different. It was really heartfelt, whereas the Getting All Your Ducks in a Row was very cerebral, kind of, discussing ideas and ways of doing things. And the Postal Service workshop, as soon as people put pen to paper, their grief really flowed for them. And that was something that I was just felt incredibly humbled by, actually, and really privileged to hold space for. And just allowing people to be there, writing these letters and collaging if they wanted. I have all kinds of different materials for people. I'm a big fan of, crayons and felt tips and coloured pencils and cutting and sticking. So I'd really provided like a whole wide range of different art materials for people. And I just felt so lucky to be entrusted with this for people. And then a couple of people showed up after the workshop having got the time wrong. And I couldn't really be there with them because I was helping to set up, I think we were having another coffin immersion, which was a whole other workshop. But I set them up in a corner of our drop-in space with the art materials and showed them the instructions and what to do. And they gave me their letters afterwards. And it was just it was just so important. It just felt really important to do it, actually. And I just felt like it was really, it was very profound work to be doing. And I felt very grateful to be there with them, actually.
I just thank you so much, Mary, for sharing that, because
Mm.
I'm just in my little tiny office here in Los Angeles, and it's been one of my hopes that Postal Service for the Dead can be this platform that people, in a sense, can run with in their community. And like the post office being the end location, right? But there's so many ways to have those conversations. So it's just really, and I'll say too, I think one of the number one questions that I get, and I'm guessing we all three get at some point, is like, oh gosh, isn't it so hard to just like read all those letters and to do this work? And I'm like, sure, there's letters that I resonate with more, and they like, they'll pull in my own heartstrings for certain reasons. But at the end of the day, I just feel so lucky and grateful and humbled and privileged to hold space for people and in these necessary conversations. So just wanted to echo what you were saying, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. I really felt as well that, because some people chose to leave the back of their envelopes blank and really stuck their envelope down, it was so tight. They'd licked every inch of the glue on it and it was super tight, stuck down. This was a private letter between them and the recipients. And then other people handed me an open envelope to read as well, because, and I had already obviously explained it was going to you, Janelle, but they wanted me to read it first as well. They really, really, really wanted to share who this person had been for them and continued to be for them, actually. And that was just really, really lovely. And I remember some really dear friends of mine, our children grew up together. I have one child. They have two children, but they did have three, and one of their twins died a few days old. And so my baby was a couple of months old and their twins had just been born and one of their babies died. And I remember they put a small little letter in the little outfit the baby wore when he was at his funeral. And I just feel like there's something that's, when it's written, it's just, it's like you've said it, and it's permanent, even though, at a funeral, perhaps somebody's going to be cremated and that letter's going to be burnt and maybe, nobody else is ever going to see it. The fact it's been written has sort of like made that mark of that person in the world, either the writer or the recipient or both. It's really cemented their place in the world, I think, and I just feel like it's so important.
It naturally goes back to this business of externalizing, which is something that ceremony is for, is externalizing. With your thing that you did, Mary, it sort of was ceremonial a little bit, wasn't it? There was a little bit of an altar thing going on.
Right.
Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so in the workshop space at Butterfield, we'd had a variety, like I say, a variety of different workshops going on, some with more of a sort of spiritual lean to them and some with a more of a practical kind of lean to them. And I mean, first of all, I really felt like there was the act of me choosing the materials to be there. I wanted there to be beautiful things for people. We had in the middle of the bell tent, you've got the sort of pole and it's a canvas tent, and we had beautiful red velvet bunting around, and we had, a lovely, well, it was a chalkboard, I was going to say, but I think it was a whiteboard actually, with the events on and things. And then in the middle around that pole, the central pole, we had, a variety of different things. It could be, a little vase of flowers or a stone that somebody had brought, or we had, it's primarily a Buddhist festival. I'm not Buddhist. And it's a sober festival as well, which was a really interesting thing. I'd never been to a sober festival before. And it just really, having that space where there was an altar in the middle, it really focused the, I'm going to say energy. It really focused the energy of the space, actually, of this is an important place. This space that we're sitting in is an important one, and it doesn't have to be ritualized in that way. It doesn't have to be in a tent in a field and have an altar for it to be important. But I think especially for the first Postal Service event that I ran, it was really lovely for me to have that ceremonial feeling, and we had pots of tea and, the pouring of a drink and giving that to somebody and being in service, I think really was important for me. I just felt like I was there for 5 days. The first day was marred by me being in the rain, putting up a tent, saying goodbye to my partner, going back to Brighton, and me having massive imposter syndrome, going, what on earth am I doing here? Who do I think I am trying to do this work? And then really sinking into it, really feeling my way into it and really feeling needed and being needed to be there and literally holding people and holding that space and just creating a space where it was safe for people to grieve. And for me to actually say to them within that workshop, especially as well, Postal Service workshop, saying, your grief is welcome here. They were words that I said, at the beginning, however that looks, and I did remind them as well, Janelle, about you saying it doesn't have to be a positive letter. Are we allowed to swear on this podcast? I don't know.
What do you think?
I was going to say it could be, a real fuck you kind of letter. Like, oh my God, how dare you treat me like that my entire life letter? Or how dare you die? You've left me holding all this shit kind of it could have been anything. And I really made that very clear to the participants. It didn't have to be, a joyful letter. It was however their grief was presenting and whatever they needed or wanted to say, that this was a space where they could do that in. And that there was a confidentiality around that as well, of if people did want to talk about the event and the workshop after, then they could do so in general terms and about their own experience in relation to that, rather than with having any identifying, kind of names or information about the other participants. So it really felt like it was a sacred space for people, that they could be safe there,
That's really
almost
interesting.
like, yeah, when people go to confession, they're like,
was
oh,
gonna
I can
ask
say what I
that.
want.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's another really interesting
Yeah.
area, the confessional. Yeah,
Mm.
and the idea of sacred space. So the literal meaning of sacred space is a space set apart. That's really what it means. So the fact that that's what the sacristy is in a church, where they prepare the sacrament. It's where you do it and you do it set apart. So it's sort of like a boundaried area. So that makes a lot of sense. At the moment, Janelle, you're getting 5 letters every 2 weeks on average, roughly. And I know there's somebody in Belgium doing something post-cantor, I think they're called. And they started in 2001 with something similar. But are there any other people other than Mary who are doing their own stuff and sending them to you around the world?
Yeah, we have had similar. So what Mary mentioned is I've put together a blog post, and I have since also done a video panel discussion with 2 other parties who have used that blog post to do their own workshops. So now there's kind of 2 resources, the written and then the like discussion type thing where you can hear about people who have done these workshops. But the 2 people I mentioned are a librarian, a fellow librarian in Indiana in the United States. They did a workshop at their local library in a very similar structure that Mary talked about. And there was 3 people total. And then someone else called Grief of the Party is the organization in New York, and they did a similar pop-up. They're doing another one in November, I believe. Same structure, kind of in preparation for the holidays, thinking about the holidays and the grief that comes up with that. And then what was the other one? Oh, in Chicago. This one was really cool. It was an artist, and the information on all these people are on our YouTube with that video. But they put an installation as part of this larger like art theatrical piece that happened at somewhere on the pier in Chicago. All the details are escaping me right now, but it was this like theatrical experience of like this scientist who was like working through grief, and it was over the top, and then they had this Postal Service for the Dead section that they set up to help people if like the theatrical experience triggered anything or made them think of anyone, then they had that space. So those are kind of my like OG people who have done workshops, and we also have a museum on the East Coast, I believe, is doing a workshop here in November, and there's one other, and it's escaping me. But yeah, so a few other people have used this platform, which has been really, really cool to see it in action, and then the opportunity to hear from participants like Mary to like hear how it went. It is really rewarding and continues. It like helps me think about like what additional resources that I can create to make it easier and accessible for people to apply Postal Service of the Dead in their own community.
I think that's brilliant. It would be great to see more coming across Europe. I still think of myself as European, Janelle. It's quite passé here. But anyway, yeah, it would be good to see more than one person in the UK doing it. It would be great. I mean, I think it's brilliant that you're going to set some stuff up for people, because I don't know that there's people here know they can do it, and that they might just be waiting for permission or thinking it's more complicated than it is. So I think those materials would be really, really great. I've written on my notes, and I know it's an important story because I've written it down, but I have forgotten who said it and what it's about.
So yeah, it was a participant at the Butterfield Festival, and I copied and pasted the message, and I'll just read that to you now. And it was just incredible. So she participated and her letter was sealed. She, I think it may be in the bundle for Janelle that I sent, but I can't remember. But it didn't have a star or heart on the back, so it's a sealed letter that nobody's going to be looking at. Her message to me was, "Hi, Mary. While I was at Butterfield, my mum left me a message saying something about having received a letter for me. She forwarded it to me, and it arrived a few days later. It was from my dad from several years ago, forwarded by from the solicitors. So over the Butterfield weekend, my late dad and I connected with each other via written letters. I found that magical, powerful, moving. Thank you so much for your part in that." And that just blew my mind. There is coincidence. There are coincidences, about the timings of that. Had it been, 2 weeks previously or 2 months previously, maybe there wouldn't have been that immediate kind of connection of ideas. But the fact that it was over the same weekend is just fantastic. I loved it.
Yeah, those kinds of timings can really give people a sense of meaning. You just have these serendipitous things, and I think we do interpret them in really helpful ways sometimes. I'm going to move on to
Absolutely.
your personal experiences of ceremony. So, who would like to go first? I'm going to ask you what your favorite experience of a ceremony is.
I'll go first, I think.
Go on then, Mary. Do it.
Even though I've been a celebrant at my friend's wedding, I think that actually I'm so proud of the funeral that we put together for my friend Ollie. And it was so irreverent and so him. And I know that I just did such a brilliant job at it. And I'm just like, that for me was just like the epitome of a really good send off. Like, it was just really was. And I feel like, we read a variety of different things there, and we had a celebrant leading the ceremony for us, but I did speak at it, and various friends spoke at it, and we were his chosen family, and I was his next of kin. And we had decorated his funeral and written very rude things that he would have loved, but we wrote them in like runic languages and like
Is this on the
Icelandic
coffin?
and stuff on the
did you
coffin, on the
all right.
cardboard coffin, so that nobody would really be offended. And we had what we lovingly called Penis Corner on the coffin because he was so outrageous with his sense of humor. And our friend had found like these kind of like, they look like mandala, color your own mandala things, but really they had like loads and loads of tiny like penises in them. So we stuck those on. I mean, there are a few other things that I actually have been sworn to secrecy about, and I can't even go into.
Oh, damn.
And I know, I'll tell you over coffee another
This
time.
is like the first ever penis corner I ever came across.
Penis corner on the coffin, and he would. Okay, so Ollie would always, when he would meet you, he would, like a fist bump. Oh man, you're gonna have to maybe edit this out. I'm unsure, but he would say the word fisting like in a really gross way, and then like if there was more than one of you, he would say things like three-way fist.
We don't have to edit. My
Okay,
community, broad-minded souls.
And we really wanted to write the word fisting on the coffin, but a friend had children who viewed him as Uncle Ollie, and we didn't want them to read it. So that was why we found runic languages and like Icelandic language and just wrote them in different languages that people couldn't eat. So not even in French, that were just really clear.
For my people out there who are listening, do you see what I mean when I say anything is possible? There are no rules. That's so brilliant. And what about your worst one, your least favourite ceremony you've ever been to?
It's really hard because obviously I don't want to sort of throw shade on anybody's experience of funerals or providing a funeral for people. I mean, there was one that was still quite funny that actually me and my, now late mum, we did laugh at quite a bit. And that was actually my dear, lovely, wonderful Nana's funeral. Because the priest looked like he was really stumbling over his words. He was really, really old. And he kept he had like, it was almost like a comedy sketch. Like he had a book of like how,
Like Father
like how
Ted.
to do a few. It was really Father Ted. And my nana was Italian, and she adopted for not a full mass. She didn't want a full mass, all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But it was in, the priest had known her. He knew her, and like
Sounds
they were
brilliant,
still,
to
like,
be honest.
reading, and me and my mum were in stitches. I'm a big inappropriate laugher
Yeah,
at
same.
funerals.
That's
So
bad,
I mean, I
isn't it?
wouldn't say it was like the worst, my least favorite one. I guess my least favorite ones are where people don't go into detail about their lives and there isn't time to explore,
There's no time to explore
events.
penis corner.
Penis corner.
Like, that's not going to come up, is it? If you don't go into detail.
You have to book the crematorium.
Oh my God. If I just ruined my reputation such as it is, no, probably enhanced it.
I could just recommend booking the crematorium if you can afford it. And I mean, with Ollie, he had no money, like literally no money. He was renting, he was on benefits. And I was only his next of kin because when I'd taken him to his psychiatry appointments, we'd said, we had to fill out the form, who's your next of kin? And I said, oh, well, I'll do it. I'll be on there because he was estranged from lots of family. And so that was why I got his body when it was released. And that's why I got to choose it. And we just said, well, we won't know if we need the whole hour in the crematorium, but let's book the double slot. I'm a real fan of booking that double slot for a ceremony.
Such great advice. Everyone out there, never book a single. Never book
if you can afford it. I did a crowdfunder. Me and his friends did a crowdfunder.
That's such a good idea. Crowdfunder is a great idea. And make room for those obscene, absurd stories.
Just allowing space for whatever comes. Again, actually, creating a space so that, if it ends shorter, nobody's going to mind.
No,
and
but then you don't have to hurry. And when Uncle Tony goes on, you don't have to go like that. Look at your watch, Uncle Tony. So that's
like,
good.
oh God, we're not going to have time for so-and-so to do their thing. And then nobody's going to have time to walk around the coffin and put their hand on it. Actually, if you've got the time, people can take their time to say their last goodbyes, and there isn't a rush, and you can go into rich detail about some stories. And that for me is really important.
Yeah, I agree. Janelle, what about you?
Is it okay if I share a non-death ceremony?
Any ceremony you like. Literally anything. And I have got someone coming on to my podcast who married the River Avon. So anything you come up with, we'll embrace with our whole hearts. We do that in Mary, don't we, in Brighton? We embrace all things with our whole hearts, as you can see, as evidenced by Mary's example.
Well, I have my favorite ceremony and my, I don't want to call it my least favorite, but like maybe just like a word of caution ceremony, kind of coupled together. So a really significant part of my childhood was I went to summer camp, which is, I feel like, I don't know if it's a a British thing, but like in the US, there's like a whole spectrum of summer camps, and that could be like its own podcast. But like I went for a week as a stay away week at a time.
We only know it from the movies, Janelle, don't we,
Okay, and it's
Mary?
like that. It's like I'm doing archery, I'm doing crafts, we're hiking, we're swimming. So really significant part of my childhood. And so one of my favorite ceremonies is on the first night of camp. After we've had dinner, there was like a main lawn area that all the campers and counselors, we'd all stand, like probably about 100 people total. We'd stand in a giant circle and we all hold hands. There was multiple other things that would happen too, but this was kind of the end of that ceremony. We all hold hands and sing a song before we all go to sleep for the first night. Um, and that's just always been one of my favorite memories and like things I would look forward to as a child, and that just coming together and being in community, and the I'm not much of a singer, but singing together is such a healing thing as well. And it was just really, I like can so vividly remember it, and it was really special.
We love that, don't we, Mary? That's so nice. Keep going.
But then to couple it with my least favorite ceremony, I'll preface with, at the camp I went to, they definitely appropriated from a lot of indigenous culture in the area. And since my time being there, they have made efforts to address those issues and change those practices. But growing up at the end of our week, so we had kind of the beginning opening ceremony, and then we had, which again, even like this is problematic, but we call it council fire to close out the week. And just like a lot of the songs we sing are still very near and dear to me, but some of the like objects we would use, like someone would wear a headdress, which is just not appropriate. That's not ours to do, and that's not ours to carry, or it was just bad and wrong on so many levels. It has since been corrected, and that's not done anymore. But I wanted to raise that. I guess I was, as we mentioned, thinking about Indigenous Peoples Day today, but also I think so many, I don't know, as someone who didn't grow up with like a very specific, I grew up Unitarian, so I'm not super religious in any way. I don't have super strong cultural ties to like, I feel like I've piecemealed a lot of things, and I think a lot of people are in similar situations, and sometimes it can feel easy to take from other cultures. And there are ways to thoughtfully and respectfully learn about other cultures' ceremonies and incorporate that with whatever practices feel good to you. But I just wanted to share that as like a word of warning. It's like we can't just willy-nilly be stealing people's very important ancestral practices, right?
I love it. And I'm all the time, every time I ask any of my guests these questions, every single time it's different. You wouldn't believe it. No one has ever mentioned summer camp. No one has ever mentioned what you just talked about. And I think it would be great to have some indigenous peoples come on and talk about their experience of that. What that feels like, having people steal your culture away from you. Yeah, really. We've got a Unitarian church in Brighton, haven't we, Mary? It's a really open-minded church. Of all the churches, it's one of the best, really, because it's really liberal and really open.
Is
But
that, I don't know if I've seen, is that the one on New Road?
I don't know what it's called.
Pavilion Gardens. Is that
Yes.
on there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A really
I've
big,
not-
open, airy space, and they're
Uh-huh.
really positive about the queer community and
Uh-huh.
doing ceremonies for them and all of that. Yeah, they're really good. Really, really open.
I only went for a few years growing up, but yeah, our Sunday school was like in nature, and we're talking about how we're all connected and being a good neighbor. And my siblings, who are older than, I'm the youngest, so they're older than me, they all got very thorough, like we're not very pretty thorough sex education. So
That's so great.
cheers to the Unitarians. I think they're
Yeah,
doing
I
some good
agree.
stuff.
I agree. And they're the same here in the UK. They're always leading dialogue around stuff that's problematic.
It's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
should
really
have a look
good.
into that actually,
No,
because I don't
they're
really know
really
much
amazing.
about them.
I loved our conversation so much, and I can't wait for people to hear about it. And what I think we need to do is make sure more and more people set up little postal services the way Mary has. So I'm hoping that some of my constellation will get in touch with you. So for that, we need your details. So I'm going to start with Janelle. If you can tell my constellation where they can find you, and then we'll move on to Mary.
So people can find us at postalserviceforthedead.com, which I know is a mouthful, but type it all out is where it works. We're also on Instagram and Facebook if you want to see examples of the letters that have been sent. So
That's perfect. And I know you mentioned Death of the Party NYC, and Melanie Wilson from there has also been on my podcast. So that's really nice that there's that connection. Yeah.
Melanie is so awesome. I love
Oh.
that y'all have connected.
Amazing. And she's going to come back and talk about the ceremony that she did for her dad 5 years after his death, which was a huge success. And she's been doing amazing things in the museum in New York, grief tours of all the art exhibitions. I completely see how you two would connect. So that's the other thing. Right. So postalserviceforthedead.com and on Instagram. Brilliant. What about you, Mary?
So at the moment, we are mostly on Instagram and you can find that on Brighton Death Collective. And we also have a very fledgling website, which is brightondeathcollective.co.uk. Again, it's a big mouthful. It's a big thing to write out. And you can email us at hello@brightondeathcollective.co.uk. So somebody who works with me on the Death Collective stuff, Dorian, lovely Dorian, shout out to Dorian, is working on the website and is making good steps with that. So fingers crossed we'll have our website up and running, hopefully by the end of the year properly. But there's still a holding page there where there's some other information on there for us. But
so maybe just go to Instagram for now.
Instagram for now, yeah.
Wonderful Dorian. I want to get Dorian
great.
in their own capacity too.
Yeah, perfect.
Another person from the States, actually. So, and they are from Philadelphia?
That is a good question. My brain does not hold much information. It's not immediately necessary.
They might be from Washington. Not the same. It's not the same.
We will find that out. Put a link in the podcast info. Dorian.
It's not even the same.
Not very close, but
I'm going
Dorian's
Philadelphia.
just
well, let's ask Dorian.
So,
They can come on and they can tell us about their experience and how they connect with everything. Dorian steals your heart the minute you meet them. There's something about Dorian. But anyway, so I think we've said all we need to say. If anybody wants to find me, by the way, you can find me on Crazy Diamonds Funeral Queen on Instagram. And then you can find me at brighton-funerals.com here. But there's also one for all the ceremonies, the wedding ceremonies, the podcast, and the funerals. And that's jess-may.com. I kind of feel like that's the easiest, quickest way of finding me. But Crazy Diamonds Funeral Queen sounds cool, so I like saying it. So is there anything else that we haven't covered that we should have said? Oh, I know. My big favourite question. So this is for both of you. What makes you hopeful for humanity?
Do you want to go first, Janelle, on this one? Because I went first last time.
Sure. I was trying to think of this question and answer, and maybe it's too simple, but the first thing that came to mind was just my friends and the people I love. I don't know, the love that I have for all the people in my life and that I know they have for me. Truly, I know that sounds so cheesy, but that's what gives me hope every day I wake up and remember that I love them and they love me, and that's what I'm here on this world for.
I
So
mean,
that
I
gives me
think
hope.
it is simple, but it's also the most profound. I did a wedding yesterday for a couple who are part of a throuple. It's my first polyamorous wedding, and they were surrounded by the most incredible amount of familial love. They'd been on, as you can imagine, quite the journey, and all three were there, and all of their parents were there, and they all just loved each other so much. And it really does make you think that that is at the heart of all the things. So, and it did give me hope. The love of that really gave me hope. So yeah, that's a really lovely thing to end on. Thank you. What about you, Mary?
I think for me, I was really thinking on this as well. And I think for me, it's the kindness of strangers and collaboration. I think as well, there's two things there. Like, the kindness of strangers, man, like really just, saved my ass so many times. And like, I like to try to be that kind person where I can in a situation. So, I have a bit of a saying of never a bystander be, just like, just get in there and like if somebody looks like, well, you really feel that instinct of like they need a bit of a hand with something, like be it carrying a pushchair or a buggy up a step or, just like they look sad. Like you could just say, hey, I like your hat or something, like just something, like that, the kindness of people in general and collaboration, like things like this where it feels like magic for me. It's like, oh, we said this thing. So Janelle over there said they were going to do this thing. I over there on the other side of the world, having no knowledge of Janelle, just did this thing like separately in my life. And then we kind of like have merged and met. And then Jess, you've brought us together in this. And we've just, those interactions and those meetings of people and like the way that people can connect and collaborate blows my mind like all the time. I'm like, it feels like magic. It's just like if you allow it, if people allow that in their lives, it's incredibly special, I think.
Allowing the magic. Okay, well that's what we're going to end on, I think. Constellation out there, allow the magic and allow the mystery.